For our first segment, we have some very experienced leaders who are game to have an open conversation on leadership and allyship. Let me introduce you to the panel's moderator. Mark Tewksbury is a record-breaking backstroke swimmer. His 16-year athletic career included 21 national titles, 7 world records, Olympic gold, silver, bronze medals, and a cover appearance, in Time magazine. When he publicly came out in 1998, Mark was one of the first openly gay Olympic champions in the world and has been a leader in the global 2SL LGBTQIA+ movement ever since. I don't know about you, but I remember back in 1992 watching the Barcelona Olympics, I literally lost my voice cheering Mark on in that come from behind win. So I am truly honored to welcome and introduce to the stage Mr. Mark Tewksbury.
Thank you. Hello, good afternoon, everybody. So I am so honored to be the moderator of the first panel this afternoon. How many people were here last year? Round of applause. How many people, who's here for the first time? Welcome, we love that. So last year, it was an amazing event, and that's why we're so excited for the program this year. It was groundbreaking. We had important conversations, discussions, tons of networking, and we heard from an icon, Billie Jean King, and we were left with the energy to do something, to find our forward, as Jennifer Bishop challenged us last year in her opening remarks. Today, it's an opportunity to build on that, to share the advancements and successes that have happened this past year, to hear from a real diverse range of perspectives, to help us accelerate this movement for equality and equity to the future. But as we look to the future, it's also important to remember how we got here. And this is the game part of the program. We've got 2 incredible leaders who are game to share their experience and insights and hopefully pull some gems for action out of that. So let me introduce you to our 2 guests. First up is Michael Downey. And Michael, just wait till I finish. Oh, you can start to walk. Michael is the president and CEO of Tennis Canada. He's held that job from 2017 to present, but he also held that role for nearly a decade until he left to be at the Lawn Tennis Association based in London, CEO from 2014 to 2017. Michael is one of the most impactful and successful sport executives in this country. He's going to be finishing his role as CEO at the end of this year, but he leaves an incredible legacy. He had the plan to diversify and increase revenue, to reinvest in tennis development and in tournaments in Canada. And we've seen this sport and the long-term athlete development plan just flourish under that incredible vision. Michael leaves a legacy of a culture, an organization that's the envy of many other national sport federations, and indeed a leading country in the ITF. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Downey! And Michael, I'll just have you take a seat right here, okay? So next up, Stacey Allaster. So currently, Stacey is U.S. Tennis Association's chief executive. She's long been a renowned sports and entertainment leader, a champion of equality, an innovator in sport, in the sport of tennis and beyond. She was instrumental in the international growth of women's tennis. She increased player prize money by 100% and helped secure equal prize money at numerous WTA major events. At the helm of the WTA, she generated over $1 billion for female players. In June 2020, Stacey became the first ever female tournament director in the US Open's 140-year history. In 2022, she became a companion of the Order of Canada. That's the highest rank within the Order of Canada. And Billie Jean King wrapped it up last year, and she was an outward-facing advocate for gender equity. Stacey is equally iconic in a different way, a little bit more behind the scenes, and it just shows that everybody has their own way to make a difference. And what a nice loop. Later this year on October 12th, Stacey's being recognized with the Billie Jean King Leadership Award at the Women's Sports Foundation in New York City. So please welcome Stacey Allaster! Come on, over here.
Thank you, Mark. So, who is responsible for the graphics? Because I love you. I'm now Stacey Allaster, not Stacey Allaster. Love it.
Missing an
I always say that. But now it's living proof. It's right up there on the big screen.
So Stacey was kind enough to share with me the letter that she received from Billie Jean King announcing the award. And in it, Billie Jean King starts it by saying, "Stacey, you've been there for the long haul!" exclamation. So I thought, what a fun place to start. You know, you've had this amazing career. U.S. Open's coming soon, and you're the centerpiece of it. And you know, it started actually right here in Ontario way back in 1987. Yeah. So give us some context. What was it like back then?
Well, look, I was just this very fortunate kid to receive a racket, 6 weeks of lessons, and a membership at the Community Tennis Club in Welland, Ontario. And it was a Tennis Canada OTA program. And I didn't know any different. I just went along to the club and fell in love with the sport. And the local coach took me under his wing. And even though I didn't have a lot of talent at playing tennis, before you knew it, I was the teaching pro at the club. And I began to have this entrepreneurial spirit of running events and getting sponsorship, and I had my own junior program. And that sort of just began this love affair that I had with tennis. I knew I wasn't going to make it on the court. So there are many ways that we can achieve our dreams through sport. And I finished at Western, landed up in Toronto, and before you knew it, the OTA hired me. And as soon as I got there, might be a bit ambitious. And because I used to take my mother's car and leave her with no car, and I would drive up to York University every year and watch the Canadian Open. And I was that kid lying on the ground, looking underneath the windscreens and watching Chris Evert and Martina Navratilova and Johnny Mack play. And so I just started volunteering, and then jobs became available. I interviewed for one job, didn't get it. Interviewed for the second job, didn't get it. Interviewed for the third job, didn't get it. Thank God I have Irish and Scottish DNA. Very persistent, and I never gave up. And we're going to talk about allyship. Bob Moffat was the CEO of Tennis Canada in 1991. And he said, I'm going to give you a job for 3 months. Special projects coordinator, just do whatever. And during that time, the Jays had come to town, and I got offered a full-time job to work for CIBC's sports agency, a very well-paying job. And I went to the guy I was working for, the guy who wouldn't hire me the other 3 times, and I said, I got this full-time job. And he said, good luck to you. If you don't want to wait until maybe we have something for you, good luck. So I went down to Bob's office, and said, out of courtesy, I want you to know that I spoke to John, and he said, good luck. He goes, give me 1 hour. 1 hour later, he came along and said, I can't believe I'm doing this, but I'm giving you a job. So 4 years later, I ultimately had his job, the guy who wouldn't give me a job. And then I had a wonderful, successful career for 15 years at Tennis Canada that gave me a stage to go international.
So when you, in 1987, were there women executives? Were there people?
They weren't in 1987. Jane Wynn was the tournament operations, really the only senior woman. She ultimately became the tournament director. And when I got onto the world stage, I was the only woman in the world. I was from a little kid, from a little town, in a little country, no tennis talent, sitting in the room with Grand Slam greats who were running Indian Wells and Miami and running the tennis world. And it was intimidating, but again, some other guys in the room, they took care of me. And so very, very fortunate that there were a lot of white men in my career, this one over here as well, who believed in me and always had the confidence that I could exceed in anything, any opportunity that I had.
Well, today's about leadership and allyship, and I think that's a great segue into being more conscious as an ally and what we can do to make sure that equity happens. Michael, you weren't up here last year. I was on the program. I was the only guy on the program. I was very conscious of that. I felt like I shouldn't take a spot that a woman should have, and I was told I should be on this panel, but you decided not to speak, and we wanted you up here this year because allyship is so important. Stacey wouldn't have had that opportunity if a male executive didn't provide that opportunity. So share some of your insights into allyship.
Well, for me, and I'll go back to when I started work, I graduated from the Ivy School of Business at Western in 1980. Most people in this room probably weren't born in 1980. But I was lucky enough to get a job offer from a really good company called Warner Lambert. Warner Lambert was eventually broken up and it became Pfizer and Cadbury. They were buying the assets. But anyway, back to my career. In packaged goods marketing in these companies, it was kind of up or out. And what that meant is you went in as what was called a product supervisor. There was like 10 of you out of school. Only a few of you would get to go to sales training. You come back, only a few of you become a product manager, and even less would become group product managers. So it was kind of a war of attrition. Anyway, I joined Warner Lambert in June of 1980. And surprisingly, because there weren't that many men in these positions, my first two bosses were women, Mary Hurst and Maura Bell. And what I want to talk about allyship in this case is that these were women that were kind of fighting for their stature in that organization. And because it was about up or out, I had two phenomenal bosses that were going to make sure I was successful. So in the case of Mary Hurst, she made sure she developed me with excellence, and she actually got me out in sales training, I think first of the class. Came back from sales training, and Maura Bell was my boss. And I had actually been told, be careful here. Maura is a really good brand manager, but she hasn't been able to move people to the next level to any great extent. Well, Maura was going to change that, and we worked extremely well together. She got me promoted to brand manager. But where this story goes is that about a year after I was a brand manager and Maura had been promoted to be group product manager, Maura went on maternity leave. And I think in those cases, she kept that kind of stuff quiet because she didn't want to make sure it didn't impact her career at the company. Anyway, where this ends is that when Maura went on maternity leave and there was another group product manager that went out to sales, I was the only one left. I had been promoted to group product manager as well. And the boss at the time kind of said, I'm going to put things with you. I'm going to run with you, Michael, because I want to keep these positions open for when Maura comes back and Audrey comes back. Anyway, what happened is I guess I kept liaising with Maura when she was on maternity leave because I was kind of wet behind my ears. I had an awful lot of direct reports, a lot of brand responsibility, and it was probably too far ahead of me at this point in time. And Maura gave me a lot of advice to kind of drive me to be able to do the job with some excellence. A year later, I was asked to go to Indonesia as the director of marketing for the Warner Lambert affiliate in Jakarta at 28 years of age. That's the type of thing that kind of propels careers. And it was two women that actually were my allies in propelling my career at my first job at Warner Lambert.
So Stacey, you've seen allyship from all different angles. You've had allies. You're an incredible ally to so many women in this room. So I'd like to hear your thoughts. What are some ways that we can, simple ways that we can be an ally and make a difference? Because a lot of talk, we want to get to some action today.
Sure. Well, everything in my professional life has come from the sport of tennis, and there were no women at the time, and we're still a little light. We're making big progress. So, in this purpose moment now of my career, I wake up every day to bring this next generation through the pipeline. And that is I'm very intentional about it. I'm constantly promoting, particularly my team. We have to give a shout out to Eva and Terry who put this event on.
Absolutely.
And, I'm a little busy, but we're all busy. But I make the time. And I think that is, we can all find 15, 20 minutes to help people. I remember one day I was getting ready for something, and I had a woman from India send me a message via LinkedIn. My assistant said, Stacey, you have time. And we have to make the time. So we can make the time for this next generation because they're our future. They are ultimately going to be the ones that bring our dream to reality of the sports system providing equal access equal resources and equal money. So I just feel inspired and proud, and many of these women are in this room today, and I have a lot around the world that I've been given a gift. My responsibility is to give back, pay it forward.
Love it. Is that amazing? Is that like, yes? Simple. There's two things in there.
It's not rocket science.
There's two things in there. I mean, there's make the time, which is like
make the time.
Simple.
Yes.
There's also being deliberate, being intentional. That's how you started. And Michael, I'm going to go over to you with that one, because I'm guessing when you left Tennis Canada in 2014, your senior leadership team did not look like it does today in 2023. And in 2023, I believe you're gender equitable completely. It's a 50-50 split. But that didn't just, which is great, but that didn't just happen, right? How did that happen?
Well, I'll relate it to, any kind of adversity, there's a silver lining, and we all went through COVID. And in the case of COVID, we unfortunately had to downsize significantly, like many companies did. We had to remove 40% of our staff because we were losing about $20 million. The silver lining is we've been able to rebuild. So we've gone from 75 employees back to about 130 employees. But it also allowed us to kind of look at the leadership team. And when my board was encouraging me to try to, what is the leadership team that you should have in that case? So pre-COVID, we had a leadership team that had one woman out of 6 or 7 leaders, had one person, Eugene's here, one person that represented our Montreal office. And other than the CFO, everyone had an awful lot of pedigree in tennis. I didn't really have pedigree, but I'd been there long enough that I knew enough to be scary probably in that regard. But where we are today is, you're right, we are basically 50-50 on the gender balance. We're close to 50-50 in the leaders that are in Montreal and the leaders in Toronto, because half our organization is in Montreal. And with the new people we brought in, we've got a great balance between tennis pedigree and people that have come from either outside of tennis or outside of sport. And I just felt, with the support of our board, it was an opportunity to diversify the voices around the table. And that's what we're seeing right now more than anything else. It's pulling this group together because we're in 2 locations. We're all from different backgrounds and different disciplines, but there's no doubt there's a phenomenal level of diversity of opinion. We're going to be a better organization for it, and hopefully be able to champion the cause of tennis across the country with great leadership.
Michael, when you were going through that process, because sometimes we say, can't find the talent.
Yeah. I was going to say, what do you say to the people who say, oh, you can't find
we can't find the talent.
They're just not out there.
And David Stern,
they are out there.
You never had that problem.
Well, no, because I look at it, from our organization, and I give credit to our former chair, Jennifer Bishop, because I worked with Jennifer in terms of bringing soft quotas into our organization, both at the board level, the senior team, and the leaders of the organization. And we thought that was necessary to balance things out. But I would make the point that the leaders that we've brought into the organization that come from different backgrounds, they're as good as they get, actually. And I don't feel like we dropped the ball at all, and our organization is stronger for it. So while people may say, are they out there? Damn right they're out there, and they just need to be given the opportunity, and we're a stronger organization for it.
And it takes a leader to be intentional.
Being very intentional.
To make that happen and make that space.
And the talent is out there.
What's interesting is all sports have a long-term athlete development plan that stretches over many, many years. We don't talk about long-term organizational development plans in sport. And maybe that's something to think about. That's where a crisis where you have to let staff go and rebuild suddenly becomes strategic, and you can make a big change. But Stacey, I think sometimes being an ally, it means you have to be really courageous, right? You might have to do something that people aren't very happy about, that you could take a lot of flack for, that maybe you could even lose your job for.
100%. I think when you sit in the C-suite, the decision-making room, you've got other colleagues who are trying to promote their team members. I want everyone to know that I'm actually a very shy, introverted, and conflict-averse human being. So being in those situations, highly uncomfortable for me to be leaning in. But when you think of the work that Billie Jean has done and paved the way for me and so many of us have opportunities, I dig deep. And I try not to ruminate too much, you know, if I don't say maybe what I exactly wanted to say right, and I just, I'm pretty focused and dogged at when I want something, I usually get it. So not giving up that whole DNA thing when it started at Tennis Canada when they turned me down. I'm laser focused and very strategic. And if I don't get it that way, I will figure out another way to achieve it.
We've all been asked to speak a little louder with our microphones, okay? You guys, so that you can hear us, that's good? Okay. Yeah, Billie Jean King also talked about your dogged advocacy for gender equity in that letter. You know, I was at a conference recently, I loved this line. Somebody said, leadership is not timeless. What got us here has changed.
Yes.
And so I'm curious from both of your perspective, what are the leadership attributes that have changed and are needed to set conditions for equity to happen? So what are the leadership attributes important today to think about for gender equity?
You want to go first? Your serve?
Yeah, I think if I look at prior leaders, and I'm generalizing in this end, it was about strength of character, decision-making, probably not showing vulnerability, because there was this belief that you had to be strong at the top. I think that's all changed now. And I think COVID has had something to do with it. The times have had something to do with it. And I think leaders need to be able to show genuine empathy for individuals. They need to show vulnerability. These are the type of new traits that I think actually resonate with the average employee, that leaders are showing a sense of being a human being and not just a strong leader.
Okay, so just so you go real quick. So like, do you want to be vulnerable for us right now and share an example of what being vulnerable looks like for a CEO at Tennis Canada?
Well, it's not easy for me because Mark and I have talked about this. You know, my role model was my father, who never showed vulnerability. I never saw my father cry. And quite frankly, as sad as this is, he died from cancer and never said goodbye. You know, they say with cancer, it's the one silver lining in cancer is you get to say goodbye, but my father didn't want to show the vulnerability, so he actually never said goodbye to his own family. So I was kind of raised in a family where you don't show vulnerability, and you were kind of taught that was weakness. It's anything but weakness. And for me, it's just being truthful about things that impact your life. And in my case, like I lost my job at Molson's, you know, I got fired. Good people get fired all the time. You know, they downsized, the profit targets were difficult, and it was very difficult for me to originally accept that. But at the end of the day, being able to talk about losing your job, good people lose their job all the time. And what that's changed for me as a leader is anytime someone reaches out that's networking who's lost their job, I will always give them the time of day because I went through that. So that, you know, that's one of the things I've used is being able to admit. And I think the other thing I'd say is any good leader has to be able to admit when they failed. When they failed. You know, not failure, you learn from your failure, you learn from your adversity. Like, you know, at Tennis Canada, you know, I was the steward of a new website called Love Means Nothing. That had to be the stupidest website around. But I drank the sauce the advertising agency gave me, and probably the team that was working for me just wasn't going to take me on in that end. But you've got to admit it was a mistake, and you move on and you learn from it. You know, the other point I'll make, I worked at Labatt, and I worked in new product development. And I had a direct line to Hugo Powell, who was the CEO at the time, because he wanted good ideas protected. And he said, if you work through the organization, they'll be killed before they get to a certain level in stage gate. And we had a lot of success, but we actually had a pretty big failure called Labatt Copper Beer. It was such a failure that Molson used to call it Labatt Flopper. But at the end of the day, you learn from these things because not all new products are going to be successful. Being able to talk about these things with your employees shows that, one, you're open and honest, and you're giving people license to explore. It's not like you want them to fail, but you're willing to take some risks because not all ideas are going to work the way, as long as you learn through it, you're going to advance as an individual and an organization.
Yeah, it's a fundamental tenet of high performance, right? You stay the same if you don't make mistakes and keep improving. Stacey, what about the attributes needed today, especially the journey you've seen since '87 to 2023?
Yeah, well, look, I'll say to our younger audience, it is a journey. And I like to think of it as sort of a garden, you plant the seeds, and you sprout, and it sprouts quickly, and then you're quite anxious to get going. But sometimes it takes that garden a little while to mature and blossom and to ultimately get there. On this journey, I will just say, be adaptable and open to change. Michael Downey came to Tennis Canada in 2004. The Michael Downey that sits on the stage today is not the Michael Downey that I knew in 2004. He was quite vulnerable just a moment ago. And it just demonstrates how we as leaders need to listen, to adapt, and I'm going to use the phrase emotional intelligence. EQ is more important than IQ the higher up the food chain you go. All we're doing every day is working with people. And our jobs are to inspire our teams. Michael used the word empower our teams, give them the resources that they need to exceed at their jobs. And so change is important. Under EQ, there's a stat, and it's real. 75% of leaders fail due to their lack of emotional intelligence. So the one thing I think we all need to do better in our education systems, in our onboarding, in our early sort of 5 to 6 years as we're shaping young cohorts that come into our organizations, men and women working together with emotional intelligence being at the center. People like to call them the soft skills. I call them the hardest skills. Why? Because the big part of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. I'm perfect at home. I don't think my colleagues at Tennis Canada would say I'm perfect, or the WTA or the USTA, but you begin to have that confidence in yourself. Understand where you have, I don't call them weaknesses, where my areas of growth are. What happens when I get under stress? The team knows I'm much more cognizant of when I get under stress, and to have the strategies to sort of have that more self-control during crisis. So self-awareness and accessibility, and I couldn't, vulnerability, you know, as a woman, God forbid I would cry, you know, in those, all of the journey. I cry all the time now. I was crying upstairs watching the video, and I was seeing Bianca Andreescu win the US Open. Are you kidding me? I sat there courtside. The dream, working for Tennis Canada, Canadian would win the US Open, and I'm, you know, heading it, insane. And then to have Leila Fernandez cry on my shoulders, sorry, Stacey, I couldn't bring home the cup. I'm up in that video crying. So just be yourselves. And to Michael said, we're going to mess up, and accept it. It's a growth moment.
Yeah, I mean, those are self-awareness is huge, because from self-awareness leads awareness.
Correct.
Because if we're going to be a great ally, we have to be able to understand what other people are going through. That's the empathy. And we have to be aware of it.
Yeah,
and we also have to be aware of a coachable moment or a moment of opportunity where we can use our voice. That's why it's so important that there's men in the room this year.
Yes.
Because most CEO spots still in sport in Canada are filled by men. And if we aren't aware as men of creating that opportunity and being deliberate about starting to change it, it's never going to happen. But we'd start to self-awareness and awareness to be able to sort of follow through on that.
Because I just came back in my
Yeah.
head. You know, I've been up since 5.
You're doing great.
Thanks. In this EQ also is cultural competency and awareness of diversity on our teams, and our own unconscious and our own conscious bias. We are wired that way. I don't think any of us deliberately wants not to be completely open, but the way we were socialized as children, the way we're socialized in the media, in education, it's there. And I come back to, as we bring on new teams and managers, constantly working at unconscious and conscious bias, because those are limiting factors to actually opening the doors for all to be able to reach the C-suite and the decision-making table.
Well, I mean, tennis, it's so appropriate that you are hosting this conference because you're a leader in so many ways in sport as a federation in Canada, but also as an international federation. Advantage All is really a blueprint for equity. And in fact, I thought of it because one of the 5 actions is eliminating unconscious bias, especially in our hiring practices. But there's a goal of getting 33% representation of women on the ITF board, and yet that was highly, highly controversial.
Correct.
Why is that controversial?
It shouldn't be, but we're fortunate to live in Canada.
Absolutely.
And when you travel the world, women and people of color and sexual orientation are not treated equally or fairly. So Dave Haggerty is the president of the ITF. Jack Graham, our Canadian, is on the board, who's in charge of rules and constitution. So he is really Dave's doubles partner in transforming 184 member nations, multiple cultures where women don't have a seat at the table. And putting himself out there, he's going for re-election. It's a tough election, but he believes it's the right thing to do. And so he's willing to put himself on the line to get these bylaws changed so that at a minimum we have 33%. I know it's great in the context of 184 outside, but not acceptable in my mind. And if anyone were to Google Stacey Allaster 2013-2012, when I was at the WTA, I was very vocal. There was not one woman on the ITF board. The sport of equality at the international level did not have one woman. So Advantage All is an amazing blueprint for all companies to take a look at. He's got 100 women that he's picked out across the world that are future committee and board members of the ITF. Again, intention, investment, programming, mentorship, sponsorship, all of the things that we know, but it's really actionable in Dave putting himself on the line.
But it's also why, tennis federations like Canada, the USTA have to punch above their weight. These are things that we may take for granted in our side of the world, but as Stacey says, when you've got over 200 nations that are part of the ITF, they're not as further advanced as we're seeing in North America. So it's important, like our chair, Peter Craik, and Jennifer Bishop and Jack Graham, that Stacey referenced, that they need to be loud and speak loud and help women that are in these other nations that actually aspire to get on the ITF board. And I know they're all working hard to do that.
Changing a board takes time, obviously, the dynamics. I heard a really great best practice as we were going to try to, modernize the Canadian Olympic Committee board and better represent what Canadian society looks like today. And that is sometimes if you bring a person that's been marginalized onto your board, it's worth considering perhaps recruiting 2 people so that one person doesn't feel the burden of complete representation and being an outsider alone. And Stacey, you're in a room full of tennis greats, and many of these are men.
Yes.
So I would imagine that sometimes for you, do you ever feel like you have a little bit of imposter syndrome? You're you're so resilient and incredible personality, I can't imagine. But what does it feel like, I guess, is what I'm saying, to be the only woman at a table full of people and they happen to be legendary in your sport?
So in this 30 years, it's been a journey. I probably did for a long time feel like I didn't belong. I like to play a little game with myself. When someone doesn't believe in me, or she's not strategic enough, or her brand's not big enough, I've heard it all. I have this t-shirt that says, "Underestimate me, this will be fun." And there's a great quote, and I keep it at my desk all the time. Believe in yourself when others don't. So even though I was never a tennis great, I have been a great tennis great off the court. My results have proven that I belong. I've earned the respect, And there's a nice quote, Stacey Allaster never played professional tennis, but she is the most competitive person in professional tennis.
That's awesome. There's a great question that's come from the audience. So when we talk about vulnerability and EI in the professional space, how do you see these strengths being considered and developed through our sports systems? So let's take that for tennis. So, you're doing great with the senior leadership team. You've been very intentional to change that dynamic. How does that flow through to the clubs and through the rest of the system in Canada?
Well, I think we've kind of taken the strategy. We need to lead by example. We've got to be a best practice. So we've got to make sure our house is doing well on that front. And then we'll eventually take those policies and benefits and aspirations into our provincial partners and work with them in that regard. And then eventually into like tennis development centers where high performance is done and the wider clubs. But we do think it's about leading by example. So if we've got really good role models that are not just, they're walking the talk, that when they're working with our provincial partners or in clubs, they can be talking about the benefits of diverse opinion and of EDI. But we want to get our house in order first before we're out preaching to others, because they're going to look up to us and say, are you guys delivering on those objectives?
Stacey,
so I want to use a real example, officials. Officials have a tremendous impact on our youth and the experience they have in sport. We train them up to be technicians. Their responsibility is to manage a fair competition. They're technicians. But they have so much to do with the experience that junior player has. I don't know what your stat is here in Canada right now, Michael. In the US, we lose about 40% of kids who come and play too competitive experience due to the terrible experience they have in the competitive environment. Coaches, parents, etc. So we're transforming the mindset and the role of an official, that the official has an impact on the consumer experience, on the player's experience as part of our retention strategy. So we have EI education now as part of our officials' recertification. Coaches need that. It's in some of the data points that we're all going to work through this afternoon. It's not just the administrators. Think about all of those individuals who are working with our athletes day in, day out. The more that they have the tools on how to deal with their own self-awareness and looking for those signs and being empathetic and not just driving them to the point that we push them over the edge with their mental health. There's so much work to be done in that space.
I would also say coaches, frontline coaches are really, really important here. We oversee an organization called the Tennis Professionals Association that has 3,000 members. And at the end of the day here, what we've got to do is making sure that we're taking the EDI mission into the training of our coaches, whether it's what level of certification is so darn important, because again, they're the front line in this end. And I'll just relate, we saw a stat a few weeks ago that said something like only 5% of the coaches of the women players at Wimbledon are women, and only 6% of the coaches of the top 200 women are actually women. So one of the things we're really working on is how do we actually bring more women into high performance coaching, have a path for them, be able to work through the pressures they feel as mothers, family members in that regard, so they stay at the game, because it's going to be a really big difference if we can change that curve and bring more women into high performance tennis, because they will also be role models to inspire young girls to want to come into the game, want to be competitive players. Because one of the things we've learned is that you're more likely to stay in high performance coaching if you were in the competitive stream. So by having more women in high performance coaching, we'll probably indirectly bring more young girls into the competitive stream of tennis as well. And then you've got this positive stream of changing kind of the bias that's towards male coaches at this point in time.
You've had your purview on the whole organization for a long time, and I'm just curious how you respond to trying to update a board, let's say, try to have a board better represent your membership. And you've got board members there that have been there 3 terms, and they just feel like they're so invaluable. Like, how could anybody ever replace me? I know so much. So how do you deal with that kind of attitude in those people? Because if some of us don't make room, there's no room for equity, right? So something's got to give. So I'm curious, you're out of the job soon, so you can be very frank. How do you handle stuff like that?
Well, I think, I'm gonna flip it around a little bit, and I think some of the men that are on our board are actually the most vocal about the need for change on the board, and very supportive of bringing more women in, more diverse backgrounds and all of that. So I think
okay, so they're vocal. Have any of them actually said, here's my spot?
Well, we have had some leave early, there's no doubt about that. Whether they did it for that reason, I don't know, but they didn't necessarily stay there full term because they felt change was actually good.
Yeah.
I think we've seen many board members that even though they can stay on the board now 9 years, they don't necessarily stay the full gamut because they believe in change in this end. But I also think, Mark, what's really important here, and it's just a general comment, like I'm 66, white Anglo-Saxon male from Toronto. Probably in the past, I was in pretty high demand in this end, and that's not the case anymore. But it's people like me understanding it's okay. Like, this is a rebalance. This is a rebalance, and boards and senior teams are going to be stronger with the diversity of opinion that comes from different backgrounds in this end. So I realize that if I want to join a volunteer board in retirement or whatever, I'm probably fighting for a couple spaces instead of, all 10 spaces. Well, that's the way it should be. Quite frankly, that's the way it should be, and that males have had the benefit over the years of not having the wider competition because people hire and recruit people of like background. So I think it's the next generation of males realizing it's okay. You're going to be part of an organization that's stronger for the diversity of opinion.
Let's pull an action out of there. So if you're on a board and the board has like 3 3-year terms, you don't have to serve all 3 of them. You can serve the first 2, do a really, really, really good job, and then make some space for someone else. Just a thought. Just a thought.
It's a good thought.
Thank you.
Yes, yes.
Stacey, do you ever feel like Groundhog Day? Like, I remember when I came out in 1998, and first of all, people were like, do we have to talk about this? And it was like, I'm sorry we do, because before something's a non-issue, it's an issue. And I said, hopefully it will just be an issue for a moment in time. I predicted in 1998, within 5 years, this will be no big deal. Unfortunately, I was wrong. It took 16 years until Sochi. Anastasia Bouzis is in the room. She was one of the few athletes that came out prior to Sochi because of the Russians' attack on the LGBTQ plus community. There was a tipping point after, and I'm so happy to see that I haven't had to do a gay in sport interview since 2015. Yes! But for 16 years it was pathetic. It's like, I can't be the only gay athlete in the world. Come on. So are you feeling like there's a tipping point here? Like, we've had this conversation, but there really is movement, and there's something like going to happen in the next short future?
I definitely feel new tailwinds propelling the conversation. Definitely, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I thought, I was really kind of depressed about it. It was 2020, come on. We have got to be able to, when I read the stats, 1 to 2% of sponsorship dollars spent on women's sports, 5% of coverage of women's sports, and probably that 5%, a lot of it was women's tennis and the Olympic Games. But what has changed in the last couple of years? National Bank signs a 10-year deal with a commitment for the National Bank Women's Championships to have equal prize money in 2027. Intentional, with a plan, and thank you, National Bank. I see that. Our Canadian women in sport, accelerating the business model for professional sport that was released in April, I think. Natalie Cook is here, who chaired that work project. It's time. Canadian Tire. Canadian Tire has made the commitment that their sponsorship dollars will be equally spent on men's and women's sport. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
And I think, as we move from linear television to digital and shorter forms of content, athletes owning their brand, athletes in charge of their own content, the commercial model is going to change so that for those athletes that may not get the same airtime in the linear, they can build a different business model. And I really do think the courage for brands is to not take the safety net of the eyeballs through the traditional ROI model. I'm not talking about CSR. This is a business strategy, but the return on investment to invest in women's athletes as brands and ambassadors is off the charts. And it completely aligns with brands' values and who is buying all the product and making all of the decisions. So, National Bank, Canadian Tire, Ally Financial leading the way. I really hope that brands are looking hard. I used to think, it's the broadcasters. Ultimately, it's the people with money who make the difference, who can make the change. Brands need to commit. Brands need to challenge the broadcast partners to give more exposure so these great athletes can be exposed so they can have more fans. The thing that drives me insane, we'll watch the Olympic Games, and what happens? We fall in love with our Canadian female athletes. It's the storytelling, their hard work, they work as hard as their male counterparts, and then what happens? It goes dark, because they don't have any coverage. Then how do they have a model? So I feel optimistic, but we still have a lot of work to do, but when you have major Canadian companies like National Bank and Canadian Tire really stepping up, it's going to put some shade on the other brands. And what can we do as consumers? We can demand more from our brand. And we know the millennials in this room, we know the Gen Zers, they are very committed to supporting brands who support the causes and the importance of equality.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to go on, but I feel it.
I love what you said, because it sets up Maria at the end of the day, who is one of the most incredible women who owned her brand and absolutely stood, in that space that traditionally was for the men. She was one of the first really successful brand ambassadors commercially. And she's gonna, and that just shows gender equity comes in all different ways, right?
It comes in all different ways, yeah. We have two streams in sport. We have the amateur and the recreational and the high performance. And then we have the business side. Professional sport is a business. Maria Sharapova is the first athlete who came with a brand plan. Well, that's not so revolutionary, but it was in sport, and it was in the early 2000s. And she was very deliberate with her brand, premium partnerships, and she changed the business model, which we now see today with a lot of athletes. She didn't just want to put a patch on. She wanted equity. She wanted to play the long game. And licensing. And what Maria did was build that revenue model for her for long term once it's over. And two, she became a businesswoman herself off the court with Sugarpova. And all of those things are a message that women, strong women, can be successful on the competitive field and off the competitive field. And all of us can contribute to this action plan in our own unique kind of way. And Maria did it to business.
And I remember Billie Jean King last year saying, know your sports business. That's where change is going to happen. So Michael, real quick, we're running out of time here. A minute or less. You're leaving your post at the end of the year. It's 10 years from now. What do you see? What does gender equity look like?
Well, I think it's, that our sport from a tennis end represents the population of this country. And as proud Canadians, we love the diversity and the attractiveness of our country to new immigrants. And our sport is more than capable of representing what Canada all looks like, especially since immigrants for this country know that tennis is probably in their wheel from whatever country they've come from, because there's 200 nations that participate in tennis. So I think over time, tennis is going to be really a poster child for the diversity and the beauty of our country that we all love being part of.
And we're both on the Olympic Committee board, and we have that same intention and goal, is to reach out to new Canadians, have a new access point for people that haven't been in sport before. Because if we don't get 1 million new people in sport, we're not going to keep performing at that.
Look, not at that level, and it's not healthy for our country. Like,
No.
let's remember that this is also a big part of the health. And we know how sport can transform our lives as for leaders. They're the future leaders of our country through their participation in sport.
So that's wrapping up our segment, unfortunately, but just a few really simple actions that we can take. Make the time. Be deliberate and intentional. That might mean being strategic with soft quotas for a while. But guess what? Through those soft quotas, you're probably going to find the most excellent talent. Be adaptable and open to change. Be empathetic and aware and vulnerable. Officials, coaches, people in the sports system, we need EI training across the board. Make room on boards. Don't keep sitting there and take that spot for yourself past your prime. And demand more from brands. We're consumers, and we all have at least that power. Thank you so much. I hope you had a good time getting us out of the gate. Unmatched Gender Equity! Thanks, Michael and Stacey.
That was awesome. Thank you very much, Michael, Stacey, and Mark. Stacey, you're an all-star in my books. Doesn't matter what they say. Thank you, thank you. Just valuable insights, and sharing their personal stories will really help inspire many of you out there. I know it's inspired me. A couple years ago, I was asked by Sportsnet to fly to New York City to sit down with, at the time, the highest baseball executive, female baseball executive in Major League Baseball. I sat down with her. Her name is Kim Ng, and I did my research. She had been the director of scouting for many years, director of player development for many years, and I thought to myself, she has all this experience, and we don't have a female general manager in Major League Baseball. I sat down with Kim, and I said to her, my final question, I'll never forget it, my final question was, what will it take for a woman to be head of baseball operations, to be the first general manager in Major League Baseball? And she paused for a minute, and she looked at me, and she said, it will take someone with courage. 8 months later, she was named the first general manager in Major League Baseball, and it took Derek Jeter, who had courage, to name her the GM of the Miami Marlins. And unfortunately, I mean, it's great, but baseball has a 200-year history, and it's 2023, and Kim Ng is still the only general manager in Major League Baseball. Have we made progress? Absolutely. There are a handful of women assistant general managers, but Kim Ng is still the lone GM. Doors are opening, yes, but we have to continue to knock them down. So that conversation we just had with allyship and leadership, it really takes some of the men that are out there to support us. It's great to say women supporting women, way to go. But it takes men like Derek Jeter in the baseball community. It takes men like Michael Downey in the tennis community. It takes strong women like Stacey to really crack the ceiling, and the glass will start to fall. For the first time, Tennis Canada will honor someone from the Canadian tennis community for their contributions to the advancement of women and girls in tennis. The Prix Jacqueline Elboutet Award recognizes a Canadian tennis advocate and champion whose lifelong contributions in the sport have made a meaningful and lasting impact on Canadian tennis becoming more equitable, inclusive, and accessible. This award is named in honor of the late Jacqueline Alboutet, who served as the chair of Tennis Canada's board of directors from 1995 to 1998, the first woman to hold this position in the history of Tennis Canada. So to tell you more about the advocacy and legacy of Ms. Boutet and her impact on tennis, please help me welcome her son, Mark, to the stage. Mark.
Thank you, Hazel, and good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today to participate in the first presentation of the award honoring my mother. On behalf of my sisters and myself, I want to thank Tennis Canada and say how grateful we are that you have chosen to highlight my mother's contribution in this way. She would have been extremely honored as tennis and volunteering were a significant part of her life. For her, tennis was the sport of a lifetime. She played tennis religiously twice a week for most of her life, and in fact, she was still taking lessons well into her 60s. Despite being a single mother, raising 3 kids and trying to succeed in business, volunteering was also always an essential part of her life. I remember vividly stuffing hundreds of envelopes for the Quebec Symphony Orchestra when I was 6 years old. It was also at that age that I started to play tennis. And I am embarrassed to say that after more than 50 years of playing tennis, I'm still much better at stuffing envelopes. There are 3 words that define my mother. Nothing is impossible. These 3 simple words that most of us would easily dismiss because, of course, we all know that some things are impossible. But my mother truly believed that nothing was impossible. It was not just a motivational phrase. It allowed her to think differently and to be more creative. Most importantly, it removed the barriers that we impose on ourselves. You know, when we just give up because we're not even gonna try, because we know it's not gonna work, or if we ask the question, the answer will be no. And that's how she approached the ultimatum received from the ATP Tour, which considered that the former baseball stadium in Montreal was no longer suitable to host a major tournament on the men's professional tour in the mid-90s. For her and many at Tennis Canada, continuing to host the tournament in Canada was vital to the development of Canadian tennis, both for the visibility of the sport and obviously for financing, as the recent pandemic has reminded us. She also saw the tournament as a way of showcasing Montreal on the world stage. Working closely with Montreal tournament director Richard Legendre and others at Tennis Canada, they secured funding from the 3 levels of government and the private sector for a new stadium. So I am incredibly proud that Tennis Canada believes that my mother has made a difference in the life of the organization. Making a difference is something that we all aspire to some way or another. Speaking of making a difference, when I read about the recipient of this award, I could see my mother in so many ways. I will let Michael introduce her, but I can assure you that my mother would be humbled to see that a person who has made such an exceptional contribution to the development of tennis and her community would be receiving an award bearing her name. Thank you.
I had the privilege and honor to know Jacqueline Boutet. She had left the board of Tennis Canada 3 or 4 years before I was hired to be the new CEO in 2004. But like all great leaders, she didn't go away. That she wanted to help me as the new leader of Tennis Canada, and especially how do I navigate and be successful in La Belle Province. Mark is right. Carlotta Lee and Jacqueline Boutet are cut from the same cloth. They were both trailblazers. They took no prisoners. They were both ahead of their time. And they were both unbelievably relentless, but always equitable and fair. Carlotta Lee single-handedly has rebuilt the Vancouver Open into a much better version of itself. She has made sure that the event keeps to maintain equality at the forefront, being a combined challenger in Vancouver. She has built the tournament not only to be a better self, but twice it has been recognized as the best challenger of the year. And I'm not talking about challenger in Canada, I'm talking about challenger across the world. But she is really known in the Vancouver Open area as what she's nurtured over the last 15 years, and especially helping the young women who travel the country trying to gain valuable ranking points to be able to compete on the main tour of the WTA. She has nurtured relentlessly over 50 relationships with families in West Vancouver who every August board young women all week. So they don't have to stay in a motel, they don't have to eat restaurant food, they get home cooked meals, they get a nice soft bed, and they get friends for life. Carlotta Lee, there's more to tennis. Just like Jacqueline Boutet was more than tennis, and she gave back to her local charity and her local community, Carlotta Lee has done the same. Carlotta was diagnosed with advanced Parkinson's in 2019, but it hasn't stopped her. If anything, it's driven her harder. Since that time, she's raised over $500,000 for UBC's Parkinson's Research Institute. And with the help of her husband, Derek, they have raised nearly $6 million for the Capilano University's childhood studies. Jacqueline Boutet would have said to me today if she was here, and she is here in one way or another, what has taken you guys so long to recognize this unbelievable trailblazer of tennis on the West Coast? But I will say, before I ask Carlotta to come up to receive the award from Mark, I'll go back to Jacqueline Boutet. Jacqueline Boutet may have made her biggest impact in Quebec, and especially with Stade IGA in Parc Jarry, but her legacy deserves a nationwide legacy. And we're getting that today because the award that we're going to be recognizing today is being done here in Toronto, and its first recipient is from the better coast, the left coast, Vancouver's own Carlotta Lee. So truly, her legacy is across this country. With that, a warm round of applause for Carlotta Lee, our first recipient to the Prix Jacqueline Boutet Award.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, fellow tennis enthusiasts, bear with me as my Parkinson's robbed me of my speech. I'm incredibly humbled and deeply honored to stand before you as the recipient of the inaugural Jacqueline Boutet Award. This recognition is a testament to the collective commitment of those who have worked tirelessly towards a more inclusive and accessible tennis system for all Canadians. I must begin by expressing my heart-life gratitude to Tennis Canada, the Boutet family, for this prestigious honor. Jacqueline L. Boutet's legacy of promoting accessibility in tennis is an inspiration to countless individuals, including myself. I'm humbled to be associated with her name and her vision. I want to emphasize that this award is not just mine, it's ours, because it belongs to all individuals and organizations, stakeholders who play a role in growing the wonderful sport of tennis in Canada. Together we have broken down barriers, shattered stereotypes, making a sport that truly reflects the rich tapestry of our nation. Inclusivity goes beyond mere representation. It requires tangible accomplished actions and concrete initiatives. We at the Alno Brown Van Open have forged relentlessly to make this accessible by supporting Tennis BC's Girls in Action Outreach Program and CLICK, which stands for Contribute to Lives of Inner City Kids. They focus on raising funds for community programs and services that support inner city children and youth in Vancouver. But this journey is not far from over. As we celebrate our achievement today, we must also recognize the work that lies ahead. There's still individuals who face challenges every day. We must continue to extend our hand to them, ensuring they have an equal opportunity in life. Let this award serve as a catalyst of greater change, reminding that industry is not a destination. Let this award serve as a catalyst for greater change and remind that industry is not a destination, but a continuous journey. So I want to relate a story about change that that happened to me. I'm a math teacher in grade 10, Mrs. Barsley, Jean Barsley, UBC Hall Sports Hall of Famer, mother of Tony Barsley. He was a BC Sports Hall of Famer. She introduced the tennis game to a school in the east side of Vancouver, Templeton High. Without her dedication and her foresight, this would never happen. I'm very glad for her vision. Together, we'll let this award serve as a catalyst of our greatest change and reminder that inclusivity is not a destiny but a continuous journey. Together, we'll explore new avenues, challenge norms, and give voice to those who are unheard. Finally, I want to thank my family and friends and colleagues who have supported me tirelessly. Without their unwavering belief in me, none of this would have been possible. I accept this award with immense pride and renewed commitment to creating an even more inclusive and accessible community to all Canadians. Together, let's build a legacy that will inspire generations to come, just as Jacqueline Louboutin has inspired us all. Thank you.
Thank you.